Rain hammered the tin roof of the small wooden cabin like 1,000 tiny drums. Daniel Hale sat by the fireplace, chipped mug of black tea warming his hands outside the forest of Varus. Minor swayed under the worst storm the colony had seen in years. He did not mind. Storms meant no visitors, no questions, and no one asking why a 34-year-old human zookeeper chose to live alone at the edge of a protected reserve. A sharp whistling sound cut through the rain. Daniel stood up, his tea forgotten on the table. The noise was not thunder, it was sharper, higher, and growing louder. By the second, he walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Something was falling from the sky. A streak of bronze light cut across the clouds and slammed into his backyard with a heavy thud that shook the ground beneath his boots. Daniel grabbed his old hunting rifle from the wall and pulled on his coat. He stepped outside into the cold rain, his breath turning to white mist in the air. Mud squelched beneath his feet as he moved toward the crater in his garden. What he saw made him freeze. A pod, a smooth bronze-colored pod, shaped like a large egg, sat steaming in the wet earth. Cracks ran along its surface, glowing faintly from the inside. Daniel had worked with alien creatures. For 12 years, he had seen ships, capsules, and cargo drops from a dozen different worlds, but this was nothing he recognized. He stepped closer, rifle lowered but ready. The pod hissed. A seam opened along the top, releasing a puff of warm air that smelled of smoke and something sweet. Daniel leaned in and looked inside. 3 tiny creatures lay curled together on a bed of soft, dark moss. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They were dragons, real dragons, each one was no bigger than a house cat. Their scales glowed faintly with different colors in the dim light. One was crimson red with sharp little horns and a tail that twitched in sleep. The second was deep sapphire blue with eyes that slowly opened to look at him, calm and ancient. The third was soft silver, the smallest of the 3, trembling as cold rain began to drip into the pod. Daniel knew he should walk away. He knew he should call the colonial authorities and report the crash. That was the rule. That was the law. But the silver one made a tiny sound, a soft cry that sounded almost human. Its small silver tail wrapped around its own body, trying to stay warm. Daniel swore under his breath. He set the rifle down against a rock, pulled off his coat, and carefully wrapped the 3 shivering hatchlings. Inside the thick fabric, the crimson one snapped at his fingers, a tiny puff of smoke coming from its nose. The blue one made no sound but watched every movement. With sharp eyes, the silver one pressed closer to his chest the moment he lifted them up. Daniel carried them inside the cabin, kicked the door shut behind him, and laid them gently on a blanket near the fireplace. For the next hour he worked without stopping. He warmed a pot of goat milk from his small herd, softened it with sugar, and fed each dragon by hand using a clean rag. The crimson one growled at him but ate hungrily. The blue one drank slowly, still watching. The silver one would only eat if Daniel held her close to his chest. He cleaned their small wounds with warm water and a clean cloth. He checked their wings, their tails, their claws. They were real, they were alive, and somehow, impossibly, they were here in his cabin. Daniel sat back on his heels and stared at them. "What in the stars are you?" he whispered. The blue dragon tilted its head at him. For a moment, Daniel thought he felt something strange, a brush of thought, like a gentle finger touching the inside of his mind. It was not words, it was a feeling, calm, trust, safe. Daniel blinked and shook his head. He was tired. It was a long day. He was imagining things. Outside, the rain slowed. The storm was passing. The crimson dragon crawled to the edge of the blanket, sniffed the air, and let out a tiny roar. It was smaller than a kitten's meow, but Daniel could see the strength behind it. Already this little one was trying to guard the room. The blue dragon curled up with its tail wrapped around the other two, keeping them together. The silver one refused to leave Daniel's lap. Every time he tried to move her, she whimpered and dug her tiny claws into his shirt. Daniel sighed and leaned back against the couch. "All right," he said softly, "all right. Just for tonight." He did not know that 1,000 light years away, 3 Vraxan war cruisers were already scanning the galaxy for the bronze pod. He did not know that these 3 tiny creatures were the last royal heirs of a vanished empire. He did not know that by taking them in, he had placed himself at the center of a galactic hunt that had already killed hundreds. He only knew that 3 small lives needed warmth, food, and safety. And Daniel Hale had never been the kind of man who turned away from that. Outside, the last of the rain faded. Pale moon broke through the clouds and cast silver light across the wet grass. Inside the cabin, beside the glowing fireplace, a human and 3 sleeping dragons rested together for the very first time. The galaxy would never be the same again. 3 days later, Daniel's quiet cabin had become a very different place. The crimson dragon had claimed the top of the bookshelf as her throne. She sat there most of the day, watching every corner of the room with sharp golden eyes. Whenever Daniel walked past the front door, she would stretch her neck and puff a small cloud of smoke, as if reminding the world that this human was under her protection. Daniel had started calling her Ruby because of her deep red scales and the fierce way she guarded him. The blue dragon preferred the window. She would sit on the wooden sill for hours, staring at the sky, the trees, and the distant mountains. Sometimes she tilted her head at nothing at all, as if listening to voices Daniel could not hear. He named her Indigo. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, and they held a calmness that did not belong to any newborn creature. The silver dragon never left Daniel's side. He named her Luna. She was the smallest of the 3, but she had the loudest voice. When Daniel tried to leave the room without her, she slept on his pillow at night, rode on his shoulder when he made breakfast, and curled into his lap whenever he sat down. Her silver scales shimmered like moonlight on water, and her warmth felt like a second heartbeat pressed against his chest. On the 4th morning, Daniel was cleaning dishes at the sink when it happened. A soft voice touched his mind. Warm, the voice said. Safe, good, human. Daniel dropped the plate. It shattered on the floor. He spun around and stared at Indigo. Blue Dragon sat calmly on the windowsill, her tail swaying slowly. Her eyes met his, and Daniel felt it again. Not sound, not words, a feeling that carried meaning settling gently into his thoughts like a snowflake landing on his palm. You, Daniel whispered, you are talking to me. Indigo blinked slowly. Another wave of feeling came through. Agreement, patience, trust. Daniel sat down hard on the kitchen floor. For a long moment he could not speak. He had spent years caring for alien animals, but none of them had ever spoken to him, not like this, not inside his own head. Luna crawled into his lap and chirped. Softly sensing his shock, Ruby jumped down from her shelf and marched over to sniff his hand, making sure he was not hurt. Daniel looked at all three of them and laughed. It was a broken, tired laugh, but it was real. "I must be losing my mind," he said. Indigo sent another feeling, amusement, gentle teasing. Over the next several days, Daniel began to learn their gifts. Indigo could share thoughts, memories, and emotions. She did not know many human words yet, but she sent pictures. Sometimes Daniel would see flashes of a place he had never been, a great mountain range under violet sky, tall stone towers covered in glowing runes, and hundreds of dragons flying in bright formations. Then the images would turn. Dark fire screams, shadows with red eyes and black weapons. Daniel would feel her grief sharp and cold before she pulled the memories away. "I am sorry," he whispered one night, stroking her small head. "I am so sorry for what happened to your family." Indigo pressed her forehead against his cheek. Ruby showed her gift on the 5th day. Wild forest cat wandered too close to the cabin, drawn by the smell of dragons. Daniel did not even see it coming, but Ruby did. She shot across the porch like a small red lightning bolt. Wings flared wide and breathed a stream of bright flame that scorched the ground in front of the cat. The animal ran for its life. Ruby strutted back inside with her head held high as if she had just saved the world. Daniel laughed and bowed to her. "Thank you, brave warrior." Ruby puffed her chest out proudly. Luna's gift took the longest to show itself, but one night Daniel woke up, shaking from a nightmare he had carried for 10 years. In the dream he saw his parents and his little sister again, smiling at him before the colonial transport exploded in a bright orange flash. He always woke up with tears on his face and a hollow feeling in his chest. That night was different. Luna was awake before he even opened his eyes. Her silver body glowed with a soft, warm light, and she pressed her small head against his chest, right over heart. A wave of peace flowed through him, gentle as a mother's touch. The sharp pain in his chest faded. The tears dried. The hollow place inside him filled with quiet warmth. Daniel held her close and cried for the first time in years, not from pain but from relief. "You are healing me," he whispered. Luna licked his cheek and curled tighter against him. On the 7th night, Daniel sat on the porch with all 3 dragons around him. The stars above Varus Minor were bright and clear. He looked up at the sky and asked the question that had been growing inside him for days. "Why me?" he said softly. "Why did you come to me out of the whole galaxy? Why did your pod land in my garden?" Indigo's voice whispered in his mind. "Because you did not fear us. You did not try to own us. You only loved us." Daniel swallowed hard. "That is enough." "That," Indigo answered gently, "is everything." High above the colony, a long black ship slipped silently into orbit. Its scanners burned through the clouds, searching, hunting. The quiet days were almost over. The sound of engines came at dawn. Daniel was outside splitting firewood when he heard the low hum cutting across the quiet forest. He froze with the axe raised in his hand. The noise was not a Colonial transport, it was too deep, too heavy, and too carefully controlled. Whatever was flying toward his cabin did not want to be noticed. He dropped the axe and ran inside. Hide, he whispered sharply, now. The dragons already knew. Indigo had felt the danger before Daniel even heard it. She was halfway to the cellar door, getting Luna along with her tail. Ruby hesitated at the doorway, her small body tense, her eyes burning with the urge to fight. Not this time, brave one, Daniel said, kneeling quickly and putting a hand on her head. Please hide from me. Ruby growled, but she obeyed. She followed the other two into the dark cellar, and Daniel shut the heavy wooden door, covering it with an old rug. He kicked dirt over the edges and pushed a table on top. Seconds later, a dark ship landed in the clearing behind his cabin. It was sleek, black, and shaped like a knife blade. No markings, no colony license, no friendly signal. The side door opened and 4 figures stepped out. They were tall, much taller than Daniel. Their bodies were covered in dark reptilian scales, and they wore heavy black armor that clicked as they walked. Their eyes were yellow with narrow slits, and each one carried a long plasma rifle. Across his back, a soft hiss came from their mouths whenever they breathed. Daniel had seen pictures of Rexan mercenaries in old colonial warnings. Bounty hunters, killers for hire, the kind of people who did not ask questions and did not leave witnesses. He stepped outside with empty hands, raised, heart pounding against his ribs. Can I help you, gentlemen? He asked, keeping his voice steady. The tallest Rexan walked forward. His armor had red marks across the shoulder, showing he was the leader. He stopped 3 steps from Daniel and tilted his head, studying him with cold yellow eyes. Human, the Rexan said. His voice was low, rough, and clicking. We are tracking a bronze pod. It crashed in this sector 2 weeks ago. Our scanners traced it to your land. Daniel kept his face blank. He had worked with dangerous animals for years. He knew how to control his breathing, his eyes, and his hands. A pod, he said, slowly frowning. I saw something fall during the big storm. Couple of weeks back. I thought it was a meteor. Never found anything in the forest. Could have landed miles from here. The Rexan leader was silent for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. A small silver device on his wrist began to glow and spin. A mind scanner. Daniel had read about these two. They read surface thoughts, emotions, and hidden fears. Any lie would light up the device like a fire at night. Daniel held his breath, but deep in his mind, something else moved. Indigo. From the dark cellar below, the blue dragon reached out to him. A cool wave of calm flowed into his mind like a river of clear water. His panic washed away. His heartbeat slowed. His thoughts became smooth and empty like the surface of a still lake. Indigo wrapped her power around his mind and hid every true thought from the scanner. The small silver device beeped. Green light. Truth. The Rexan leader frowned. You are honest, he said. It was not a question. I have nothing to hide, Daniel answered. His voice did not shake. Just then, a loud sound came from under the cabin, a soft thump followed by a tiny growl. Ruby. The Rexan leader's head snapped toward the sound. His rifle swung off his back. In one smooth motion, his 3 soldiers raised their weapons. Plasma chambers glowed blue. What was that? The leader hissed. Daniel's mouth went dry. He opened it to speak, but before he could answer, the cellar door exploded upward in a burst of splinters. Ruby shot out of the hole. Like a small red rocket, her wings flared wide. She landed on top of the broken table and let out a roar that was far too big for her tiny body. Then she breathed fire. A ribbon of bright orange flame shot across the porch, stopping just in front of the Vrexen leader's boots. The heat hit him like a wall. He jumped back, hissing in shock. His soldiers raised their rifles in panic. But in that same moment, Luna slipped out of the cellar and climbed up Daniel's leg, up his back and under his coat. Her silver glow spread through the fabric. Daniel felt a cool tingle over his skin. When the Vrexens looked back at him, their helmet sensors flickered and failed. Luna's silver aura was hiding his heat signature to their machines. Daniel was barely there. Indigo stepped out last. She walked slowly onto the porch and stood between Daniel and the hunters. Her blue eyes burned with power, and the leader's mind scanner suddenly cracked down the middle with a sharp electric snap. The Vrexen leader stared at the three dragons. His eyes went wide. "Royal heirs," he whispered, "all three alive." He stepped back, raised his hand, and barked an order in a clicking language. His soldiers retreated quickly to the ship. Daniel stood very still, his hand resting on Ruby's small head as the black ship lifted off and disappeared into the morning sky. Daniel finally let himself breathe. He looked down at the three dragons, standing around him like small, loyal guards. "Each of you," he said softly, "each of you chose me for a different reason. I understand now." Indigo looked up at him, her voice warm. In his mind, they will come back with many more. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we better be ready." Weeks slipped by like falling leaves. Daniel did not waste a single day. He moved the dragons deeper into the forest, away from the cabin to a hidden valley he had once used to rehabilitate injured wildlife. Tall rocks surrounded the valley on three sides, and a narrow stream cut through the middle of it. Daniel built a simple shelter from old shipping crates, tarps, and wood he dragged from the reserve. It was rough, but it was hidden. It was safe. The three dragons grew faster than anything Daniel had ever seen. Ruby was now the size of a large dog. Her red scales had darkened into a deep crimson with sharp spikes along her back, and a long, powerful tail. Her wings had grown strong enough to lift her into short flights, and her flame had become hotter and longer. She trained with Daniel every morning, practicing strikes, dodges, and aerial turns in the narrow valley. Indigo stood almost as tall as Daniel's waist. Her blue scales shimmered like sunlit water. Her voice in his mind was sharper and clearer now, and she could hold long conversations with him without needing pictures. Her power was growing, too. She could lift small objects with her mind. She could feel the thoughts of animals a mile away. She could calm Ruby with a single look when the red dragon became too wild. Luna remained the smallest, but she was no longer fragile. Her silver scales had a gentle glow in the dark like moonlight on snow. Her eyes held an old kindness that did not match her young body. She still slept beside Daniel every night, but her healing gift had grown much stronger when a wild forest deer came to the valley with a broken leg. Luna placed her small head against the wound and softly hummed a song with no words. Within an hour, the deer stood up and walked away healed. Daniel watched it happen and sat down, slowly on a rock. He whispered to Luna, you are something truly special, little one. Luna chirped softly and climbed into his lap. In the evenings, Indigo shared her memories with Daniel. She would curl her long neck around him, press her forehead to his temple, and open the door to her people's past. Daniel saw the Draconis Empire in its full glory, great floating cities made of stone and crystal, dragons of every color flying together in massive wings, their scales shining under twin suns, libraries filled with ancient books written in glowing runes, schools where young dragons learn to bond with their chosen guardians, always other dragons, never outsiders. Then Indigo showed him the fall. The Galactic Council had feared the dragon's power. They had made quiet deals with the Vraxan mercenary clans. Ships came in the night, cities burned. Dragons fell from the sky, the royal clutch, the last eggs of the royal bloodline had been placed in the bronze pod and launched into deep space. During the final hour, the pod drifted for months, lost before it finally found a world with life. It found Varus Minor. It found Daniel. We were not meant to survive, Indigo said softly in his mind one night as the three dragons sat around a small fire. Our people thought the royal bloodline was gone forever, but here we are with you. Daniel stared into the flames. His voice was thick with emotion. I am just one man, he said. I am a zookeeper. I fix broken wings and clean cages. I am not a warrior. I am not a leader. I do not know how to protect you from an empire. Indigo's blue eyes glowed gently. You already have, she said, every day. Just by loving us. Ruby pressed her warm body against Daniel's side. Luna climbed onto his shoulder and rested her small head against his neck. The fire crackled softly. Daniel felt something shift inside him. For 10 long years since the accident that took his family, he had been a ghost walking through his own life. He ate, he worked, he slept, but nothing had touched him. Nothing had felt real. He had built walls around his heart so thick that no light could get in. These three dragons had broken every wall. Luna's healing gift had done more than soothe his old nightmares. It had reached into the deepest place in his chest, the hollow place where his mother's laugh had lived, and filled it with warmth again. He could think of his family now without breaking. He could remember their smiles without drowning in tears. For the first time in a decade, Daniel felt whole. I will protect you, he said quietly. All three of you. I do not care how many ships they send. I do not care how many soldiers they bring. They will have to kill me first. Ruby let out a low growl of agreement. Indigo nodded slowly. Luna nuzzled Chica. That night Daniel built a plan. He taught Ruby how to attack from high angles and how to spread her fire in a wide arc. He taught Indigo how to focus her mind power on machines, not just on objects. He taught Luna how to stretch her silver shield over all of them at once. Together they trained for hours, each day turning their love into something sharper and stronger. They were no longer hatchlings. They were becoming a family of warriors. High above Varus Minor in the cold darkness of orbit, a massive Vraxan war cruiser dropped out of faster than light travel. Behind it came 3 more, then 5, then a dozen. A Galactic Council observer ship followed them, marked with the silver seal of the High Senate. The hunters had returned, and this time they had brought an army. Daniel stood in the hidden valley at sunset, his 3 dragons beside him, and looked up at the sky. Somewhere above the clouds, death was coming. He was ready. The sky turned black at noon. Daniel was carrying a bucket of water back to the shelter when the shadows fell across the valley. He looked up, and his heart froze. A dozen Vraxen drop ships were descending through the clouds, their engines roaring like angry thunder. Armored vehicles dropped out of larger cargo pods and slammed into the forest with heavy thumps. Dust and leaves flew in every direction. Tall trees cracked and fell. Behind the drop ships, a sleek silver shuttle hovered higher up. It bore the mark of the Galactic Council High Senate, a watcher sent to record the capture of the last royal dragons. Daniel dropped the bucket. "They are here," he shouted. The 3 dragons burst out of the shelter like a storm. Ruby's red scales shone in the sunlight as she spread her wings and lifted into the air. Indigo moved beside Daniel, her long blue neck raised, her eyes calm but burning. Luna climbed onto Daniel's back and wrapped her tail around his chest, her silver glow already spreading across his body. From the trees came the Vraxen soldiers. Dozens of them, maybe 50. They moved in tight formations, rifles raised, their yellow eyes locked on the small human and his dragons. 3 armored tanks rumbled through the broken trees behind them, their long cannons glowing with blue energy. The Vraxen commander stepped forward. He was the same leader from the cabin weeks ago, his red-marked shoulder plate dented from some distant battle. "Human," he shouted through his helmet. "Speaker, step aside. The royal heirs are not yours to protect. Surrender them now and you will live." Daniel picked up his old hunting rifle. It felt small and stupid in his hands compared to the weapons pointed at him. But he raised it anyway. His back straightened. His voice came out louder than he expected. "They are my family," he shouted back. "You want them, you come through me." The Vraxen commander paused, then he nodded slowly as if he respected the answer. "So be it." He raised his arm and dropped it. The tanks fired first. 3 bright blue plasma bolts screamed across the valley. Daniel's whole body tensed, but Luna was already moving. Thick silver shield burst out of her small body, wrapping around Daniel, around Indigo, around the ground beneath their feet. The plasma bolts hit the shield and exploded in harmless flashes of light. The shockwave shook the valley, but nothing touched them. Then Ruby screamed from above. It was not a hatchling squeak anymore. It was a true dragon's roar, deep and terrible, and it shook the trees for a mile. Ruby dove from the sky like a burning red star. Her mouth opened wide. A wall of blue-white flame poured out of her, hotter than any fire Daniel had ever seen. It hit the lead tank and melted the armor like wax. The tank exploded in a burst of black smoke and flying metal. The Vraxen soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts flew at Ruby from every direction. She twisted and rolled in the air, dodging most of them. A few hit her shield scales and bounced away. Harmlessly, she circled around and came down again, spraying fire across the second tank. It burst into flames. On the ground, Indigo raised her head. Her blue eyes began to glow. The Vraxen drones that were circling overhead suddenly froze in the air. Their engines stopped working. Indigo's mind wrapped around every machine in the Sky, she slowly raised one front claw, then clenched it into a fist. All six drones crumpled in midair, crushed by invisible pressure, and fell out of the sky like broken toys. The Vraxan commander shouted orders. His soldiers began advancing, using the trees for cover. Their rifles fired non-stop. Daniel took a breath. He raised his hunting rifle. He was no warrior, but he had hunted wild predators for years on this frontier world. He knew how to aim. He knew how to hit what he aimed at. He fired 3 shots. 3 soldiers fell. Luna wrapped her silver shield around him tighter, blocking return fire that would have killed him. Ruby came down again, breathing a long curtain of fire across the Vraxan line. Soldiers scattered, screaming, their armor glowing red-hot. The third tank tried to retreat, but Indigo seized it. With her mind, she lifted it 10 feet into the air and threw it sideways into the drop ships behind the enemy line. The explosion shook the whole valley. Daniel fought with his 3 dragons as one single family. They did not need to speak. They moved together, protected each other, and struck as one body. Ruby cleared the sky. Indigo shattered the machines. Luna shielded Daniel and healed every small burn and cut on all of them, and Daniel, with his old rifle, picked off every soldier who tried to sneak around their flanks. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke began to clear, only the Vraxan commander was still standing. His armor was cracked. His rifle was gone. He stood among the bodies of his fallen men and stared at Daniel and the 3 dragons. Impossible, he hissed. They bonded with a human. High above, the Galactic Council shuttle hovered in stunned silence. The observer on board had recorded everything. Her hands shook on the controls. Daniel walked slowly across the scorched valley floor. Ruby landed beside him. With a heavy thud, Indigo walked on his other side. Luna stood proudly on his shoulder. He stopped in front of the Vraxan commander and lowered his rifle. Leave, Daniel said quietly. Tell your masters, tell the council, tell every hunter in this galaxy, these 3 are mine and I am theirs. Anyone who comes for them will answer to humanity. The commander stared for a long moment. Then he bowed his head slightly, turned, and limped away toward a damaged ship. The shuttle above began to descend. Not to attack, to talk. The silver shuttle landed gently in the scorched valley. Daniel stood in the middle of the battlefield, his hunting rifle lowered. His 3 dragons gathered close around him. The air smelled of smoke and melted metal. Broken trees creaked softly in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, the last Vraxan ship was vanishing into the clouds, carrying their defeated commander away. The shuttle door opened with a soft hiss. A tall, thin figure stepped out. She was humanate but not human. Her skin was pale lavender, and her long silver hair was tied back in a simple braid. She wore a flowing white robe with the seal of the Galactic Council on her chest. She carried no weapon. Her hands were open, raised slightly, palms out in a gesture Daniel understood in any language. Peace. She walked slowly across the broken ground, her eyes moving from Daniel to the 3 dragons and back again. My name is Ambassador Velia, she said. Her voice was soft and careful. I was sent by the High Senate to observe the capture of the royal heirs. Instead, I witnessed something that has not happened in 10,000 years. Daniel did not lower his guard. Ruby's Throat glowed faintly, ready to release. Fire, Indigo watched the stranger with sharp blue eyes. Luna clung to Daniel's shoulder, humming softly. "What do you want?" Daniel asked. "To talk," Velia said simply, "not to fight. The council has already sent orders to stop all hunting of the royal heirs. What I saw today changes everything." "Why?" Daniel asked. "Why did your council let this happen? Why did they hunt these children across the stars?" Velia bowed her head. "Fear," she said quietly. "For generations, we were told the dragons were too powerful, too ancient, too dangerous. Old members of the Senate made deals in the dark, secret deals, wrong deals, but today the truth has been recorded. A human, a young species we dismissed as unimportant, opened his door to 3 frightened Barbies and raised them with love. That is not the act of a threat, that is the act of family." She lifted her eyes and looked at Daniel. "The council wishes to make peace with you, with them, and with humanity." Daniel stood very still. His throat felt tight. He looked down at the 3 dragons around him. Ruby pressed her warm head against his leg. Indigo's calm voice whispered inside his mind, "She speaks true. I feel no lie in her." Luna nuzzled his cheek. Daniel took a slow breath. He thought of the bronze pod crashing into his garden in the storm. He thought of 3 tiny hatchlings shivering in his coat. He thought of 10 years of loneliness washed away by 3 small, warm bodies curled against him in the night. He thought of his family, the family he had lost, the family he had found. "All right," he said finally, "we will talk." Months passed. The Galactic Council came to Varus Minor in force, but not with weapons this time. They came with builders, healers, teachers, and diplomats from 100 worlds. The Hidden Valley became the first Dracona sanctuary, rebuilt in 10,000 years. Stone towers rose from the rocks. A small crystal library was placed near the stream. Dragons from distant worlds, survivors who had hidden for generations in deep caves and forgotten moons, began to come out of hiding. They flew in from the stars, one by one, and knelt before the 3 royal heirs. Ruby grew into a mighty warrior dragon, with scales as dark as blood and wings that stretched 30 feet across. She became the captain of the guard. Indigo grew into a tall, elegant scholar dragon with eyes that saw through every lie. She became the keeper of lost knowledge and the voice of her people in the High Senate. Luna stayed the smallest of the 3, but her silver glow became known across the galaxy. Her healing touch cured diseases that no medicine could cure. Ships came from 1,000 worlds asking for her blessing. And Daniel Hale, the quiet zookeeper from a small frontier colony, stood at the center of it all. He was given a title he never asked for: Dragon Father, Guardian of the Royal Clutch, Ambassador of Humanity to the Draconis people. He did not wear robes or golden armor. He still wore his old coat. He still kept his small cabin, rebuilt now with better wood and a stronger roof. He still fed his dragons goat milk in the mornings, though now a full pot of it went to each of them every night after the visitors left and the councils ended. Daniel sat on his porch with all 3 dragons around him. Ruby guarded the forest edge. Indigo curled her long neck around his chair. Luna slept in his lap just as she had that very first night. On one quiet evening when the twin moons rose together over the valley, Daniel asked the question one more time. Why me, he said softly, out of the whole galaxy, truly why me? This time all three dragons answered, together in his mind. Because you were brave enough to open the door, Ruby said. Because you were wise enough to listen, Indigo said. Because you had a heart gentle enough to love us, Luna said. Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with quiet tears. I am the lucky one, he whispered. Years later, the children of Varus Minor would tell the story around their fires. They would speak of the stormy night when a bronze pod fell from the sky. They would speak of three beautiful dragon Barbies who appeared at a lonely man's door. They would speak of the human who did not turn them away. And the galaxy would remember always what humanity had done. Not conquered, not ruled, not owned, but opened a door in the rain and said, come inside, you are safe here. That is how humanity earned its place among the stars.